that Diana, Princess of Wales, has in fact been killed in that car accident.
New documentary, Prince Harry not only blamed the paparazzi for the crash that killed his mom.
When investigators first examined the tragic crash that claimed Princess Diana's life, many believed every detail had already been uncovered. But now, cutting-edge artificial intelligence has gone back to reanalyze the evidence, and what it uncovered has left even seasoned experts completely speechless. Hidden within the wreckage, long-overlooked details are painting a chilling new picture of what may have truly happened that night. These shocking findings don't just reopen old wounds, they raise haunting questions no one was prepared to face. So, what exactly did AI actually reveal? A princess under siege. By the mid-1990s, Princess Diana had become both the most photographed woman in the world and one of the most misunderstood. Every time she left Kensington Palace, she was met with a blinding wall of camera flashes. The paparazzi didn't just follow her, they hunted her, waiting outside gyms, restaurants, airports, and even hospitals. For Diana, who longed for normalcy and genuine human connection, life had become a performance she never volunteered to give. Her marriage to Prince Charles, once celebrated as a fairy tale union, had crumbled into a public heartbreak. Tabloids thrived on rumors of betrayal, cold silences, and extramarital affairs. The fairy tale princess was now cast in a cruel drama that the public devoured. Diana herself admitted in her famous 1995 Panorama interview that she felt isolated and unprotected, her struggles with bulimia and depression spilling into view. Instead of easing the pressure, her vulnerability became front-page fodder. Every confession, every tear was turned into headlines. But Diana refused to be confined by tragedy. She reshaped her role, becoming the people's princess, not through royal protocol, but through empathy. She embraced the marginalized and the forgotten. She famously shook the hands of AIDS patients at a time when fear dictated distance, and she walked across active minefields to campaign against landmines. These acts were groundbreaking, drawing admiration from millions worldwide. Yet her independence from royal norms and her growing influence unsettled those in power. The more she stepped out of the palace's shadow, the more the press pursued her with ruthless obsession. By 1997, Diana's life was in a state of transition. With her divorce from Charles finalized, she sought a new identity beyond the monarchy. She poured herself into humanitarian projects while cautiously exploring love and freedom. But peace was fleeting. The paparazzi swarmed her vacations, splashing intimate moments across front pages. Her relationship with Egyptian film producer Dodi Fayed only intensified the spectacle. Suddenly, every smile was dissected. Every gesture spun into speculation about engagements or even pregnancy. Diana confessed to friends that she felt hunted, as though her every breath was documented. Her private struggles and her public strength made her both adored and relentlessly targeted. She stood between worlds: royalty and independence, vulnerability and resilience, love and loss. Yet she couldn't escape the cameras. For Diana, the siege never lifted. Each move she made was shadowed by judgment. Every attempt at happiness turned into a global headline. And then came Paris, a city where she hoped for a quiet escape. But instead, the pressure mounted into a dangerous storm. The Ritz Hotel would become the stage for her final hours. Hours that unfolded with tension, secrecy, and decisions that would change history forever. But here's the question. Was that night pure accident, or a pattern too precise to ignore? Stay tuned as we uncover the clues hidden in Diana's final hours. The final hours at the Ritz. Paris, August 30th, 1997. The City of Light glittered as always, but for Princess Diana, the evening carried an uneasy weight. After weeks of being pursued across the Mediterranean by speedboats and helicopters, she had arrived at the Ritz Hotel with Dodi Fayed, hoping for a brief pocket of calm. Yet the cameras were already there, pressed against the glass, their lenses waiting to devour every glimpse of her face. Inside the Ritz, Diana tried to maintain composure, but she was weary of the chase. The couple's dinner plans at an exclusive restaurant had been abruptly cancelled. Why? because outside the swarm of paparazzi had grown unbearable. Their flashes lit up the night like lightning, their shouts echoing down the streets. To step out the front entrance meant walking into a storm. So the evening shifted into improvisation. Dodi, determined to shield her from another humiliating spectacle, devised a plan. 2 decoy vehicles would leave from the hotel's main entrance, drawing the photographers into pursuit. Meanwhile, Diana and Dodi would slip quietly out a rear service exit and into a waiting black Mercedes S280. It was a strategy born of desperation, not luxury. The man behind the wheel was Henri Paul, the deputy head of security at the Ritz. He knew the corridors of power and the world of VIP protection. Yet, his very presence that night has remained one of the deepest mysteries. Hours earlier, Paul had disappeared without explanation, only to return shortly before the escape plan was hatched. Was he merely filling in for duty, or was there more to his sudden reappearance? As the clock approached midnight, the hotel buzzed with quiet urgency. Diana, dressed elegantly but without the stiffness of royal protocol, moved swiftly through the back exit. She carried not just her handbag and belongings, but the exhaustion of years under siege. To her, this was supposed to be a brief reprieve from the endless pursuit. At 12:20 a.m., the Mercedes pulled away. Henri Paul sat at the wheel. Trevor Rees-Jones, Diana's bodyguard, occupied the front passenger seat, and in the back, Diana and Dodi sat close, hoping the night would finally give them peace. But peace was not waiting. As the car surged forward, paparazzi on scooters roared to life, weaving recklessly between cars. Cameras swung, shutters clicked, and the chase resumed, more aggressive than ever. Instead of heading toward Dodi's nearby apartment, the Mercedes accelerated toward the Pont de l'Alma tunnel. In that decision lay the turning point. So what truly happened in that tunnel, and what role did Henri Paul play in the tragedy? Stay with us, because the answers will shock you, and you won't want to miss what comes next. The unanswered questions. Even before the Mercedes slammed into the 13th pillar of the Pont de l'Alma tunnel, the night was already littered with inconsistencies. To this day, the role of Henri Paul, the man behind the wheel, remains one of the most haunting puzzles of Diana's final hours. Paul was no ordinary driver. As deputy head of security at the Ritz, he was experienced in handling VIP guests, a man trusted with the safety of politicians, celebrities, and royalty. Yet the official narrative would later paint him as reckless, dangerously intoxicated, and unfit to drive. According to toxicology reports, his blood alcohol level was more than 3 times the French legal limit. On paper, Henri Paul should have been stumbling, incoherent, incapable of making rational decisions. But the surveillance cameras at the Ritz told another story entirely. Footage from that evening showed Paul walking steadily through the lobby, greeting staff with ease, bending down to tie his shoelaces without a wobble. His speech was clear, his movements sharp, even cheerful. Those who interacted with him that night swore he appeared sober. Trevor Rees-Jones, Diana's bodyguard and the only survivor of the crash, later testified that he never suspected Paul had been drinking. The contradiction was jarring. How could a man allegedly so drunk appear so composed? Adding to the mystery were the missing hours in Paul's timeline. After finishing his official shift earlier that evening, he vanished for nearly 3 hours. No one could confirm where he went or who he met. When he returned to the Ritz around 10 p.m., he suddenly became central to the escape plan. Why was he chosen to drive Diana and Dodi when other professional drivers were available? Those unaccounted for hours have become one of the darkest gaps in the chain of events. Then there was the route itself. Security experts later questioned why the Mercedes took the tunnel at all. Standard VIP protection protocols avoid enclosed spaces like tunnels, where escape routes are limited and threats amplified. Yet, Henri Paul steered directly toward the Pont de l'Alma, a route that made little sense for someone trained in security logistics. Was it a spontaneous decision, a mistake, or something planned? The aftermath only deepened suspicion. The emergency response was oddly delayed. Despite being in central Paris, it took far longer than expected for Diana to be transported to the hospital. Some investigators noted that critical evidence at the crash site disappeared or was mishandled. Security cameras that should have captured vital footage were conveniently facing the wrong direction, switched off, or missing altogether. None of these irregularities by themselves proved foul play, but together they painted a picture riddled with gaps. A sober man labeled drunk, hours unaccounted for, a strange, dangerous route, medical responses that dragged on, evidence that vanished. These weren't simply mistakes, they were questions that demanded answers. For years, investigators and conspiracy theorists alike circled these contradictions, but technology in 1997 could only go so far. The files sat in archives, the data scattered across thousands of pages. It would take decades and the rise of artificial intelligence to revisit the puzzle with fresh eyes. And when I finally did, the discoveries were chilling. The chaos of the crash. Just after 12:20 a.m., the black Mercedes carrying Diana, Dodi, Trevor Rees-Jones, and Henri Paul accelerated into the Paris night. The decoy plan had failed almost instantly. Paparazzi on scooters swarmed the car, headlights glaring, engines revving, and shutters firing in relentless bursts. Witnesses later described a blur of motorcycles weaving recklessly between lanes, closing in on the fleeing Mercedes as if it were prey. The vehicle raced along the Seine, gathering speed. Instead of turning toward Dodi's apartment, Henri Paul steered into the Pont de l'Alma tunnel. In that instant, Diana's fate was sealed. At 12:23 a.m., the Mercedes struck the 13th pillar with brutal force. The front of the car crumpled like paper. The sound of twisting metal echoed through the tunnel. Dodi and Henri Paul were killed instantly. Trevor Rees-Jones miraculously clung to life despite devastating injuries, and in the wreckage of the back seat, Princess Diana was critically injured but still breathing. Witnesses who stopped at the scene recalled her faint moans, proof she was alive in those fragile moments after impact. But even as tragedy unfolded, the chaos only deepened. Within seconds, photographers who had chased the car were already surrounding the wreckage. Instead of rushing to help, many leaned into shattered glass, climbing onto the crumpled hood, their cameras flashing like a grotesque lightning storm. To onlookers, it looked less like a rescue and more like a stage, Diana's suffering illuminated by relentless bulbs. Among the twisted metal, investigators later found something unexpected: faint streaks of white paint on the Mercedes, alongside fragments of a broken red taillight. These weren't from Diana's car. They pointed to another vehicle, a white Fiat Uno, that appeared to have made contact just before the crash. Yet no such car appeared in official reports, and no driver came forward. French authorities searched through thousands of vehicles, but the mysterious Fiat vanished without a trace. Emergency responders eventually fought their way through the chaos, stabilizing Diana at the scene before transporting her to the hospital. But by then, crucial time had slipped away. The confusion, the flashing bulbs, and the inexplicable delay all added layers to the tragedy. The crash was devastating in its violence, but it was the contradictions surrounding it. The mystery Fiat, the photographers circling like vultures, the long wait for help that kept questions alive. Questions that the technology of the time couldn't resolve. But decades later, AI would return to these very fragments, and what it found inside the wreckage would challenge everything we thought we knew. But what if those contradictions weren't random at all, but fragments of a hidden pattern only modern AI could see? Let's dig into how technology is rewriting the story of that night. Enter the machines. AI takes over. For years, the official story of that night in Paris remained largely unchallenged. A drunk driver, an out-of-control chase, and a tragic accident. But as the decades passed, the contradictions refused to fade. Witness accounts that didn't align, medical timelines that raised eyebrows, a mystery Fiat that slipped through the cracks, files stacked in dusty archives, thousands of pages of police reports, toxicology results, witness statements, and forensic notes sat waiting. Then came technology that the investigators of 1997 could never have imagined: artificial intelligence. In recent years, researchers began feeding this mountain of evidence into advanced AI systems designed to do what human investigators couldn't: sift through vast, tangled data sets in seconds, flag inconsistencies, and detect patterns invisible to the naked eye. Where a detective might compare 2 or 3 testimonies, these algorithms could cross-reference thousands simultaneously, identifying overlaps, contradictions, and statistical anomalies with mathematical precision. The process was meticulous. Every page of transcripts, every statement from photographers, police officers, and bystanders, every technical report on the Mercedes, all of it was digitized and uploaded into a machine learning system. The AI had been trained on deception detection, linguistic analysis, and behavioral probability mapping. It didn't look for drama or speculation. It looked for math, for the cold calculations of probability human intuition so often misses. What emerged was startling. The AI didn't simply confirm the known irregularities, it exposed deeper layers of anomalies that investigators had either overlooked or dismissed. It found convergence points, moments where multiple independent factors aligned in ways so improbable they almost certainly weren't random. It flagged speech patterns in official statements that bore the statistical hallmarks of coordinated messaging rather than independent recollections. It even mapped communication patterns and response times that, when placed on a timeline, looked less like coincidence and more like choreography. For the first time, the events of August 31, 1997, were being re-examined not through human judgment, but through algorithms indifferent to emotion or politics. The AI wasn't swayed by reputation, power, or public opinion. It reduced the tragedy to data, and the data, when processed at scale, suggested that what happened in that tunnel could not be explained by accident alone. This was not about conspiracy theories whispered in tabloids. This was mathematics. Probability charts showing less than 1% chance that so many inconsistencies could align naturally. Deception markers lighting up across testimonies once thought reliable. Emergency response patterns that looked, to the AI, less like chaos and more like procedure. For 27 years, the truth had been buried beneath noise, speculation, and human limitation. But now, AI was stripping the case to its raw numbers. And those numbers told a story that experts could no longer dismiss. The machines had spoken. What they found next would leave investigators and the world speechless. Patterns that shouldn't exist. When the AI finished crunching the mountain of data, its conclusions were not vague or open to interpretation. They were precise, mathematical, and impossible to ignore. What it uncovered were anomalies so statistically improbable that they pushed the boundaries of coincidence into the realm of deliberate coordination. The algorithms identified what researchers called convergence anomalies. These were moments when multiple, unrelated factors lined up in ways that simply shouldn't have happened randomly. In Diana's case, at least 7 independent variables, ranging from Henri Paul's unexplained absence earlier that evening to the missing CCTV footage, to the presence of a mysterious Fiat Uno, aligned in patterns with less than a 0.3% chance of occurring naturally. In other words, the odds of these factors stacking together by chance were astronomically low. But the revelations didn't stop there. The AI analyzed witness testimonies with natural language processing, comparing the rhythm, word choice, and phrasing of each statement. What it found was unsettling. Controlled language markers. Testimonies that should have been independent showed statistical similarities, as if key witnesses were using rehearsed or coordinated phrasing. 73% of the official statements bore deception indicators, mathematical red flags, suggesting that the truth had been managed, not freely told. Then came the behavioral mapping. Using probability algorithms, the AI flagged patterns of decision-making consistent with what it termed operational stress signatures. These were behaviors usually seen in coordinated operations, like synchronized timing, unusual consistency in choices, and tightly aligned reactions across different individuals. According to the system, such behavioral harmony was far outside the range of chance for unrelated people acting spontaneously. Communication timelines also raised alarms. The AI mapped call records, movement logs, and witness placements, uncovering relationships between events that shouldn't have been statistically linked. The likelihood that these patterns occurred randomly, less than 0.01%. Numbers this precise are not conspiracy theories, they are probabilities, and the math simply didn't fit the official story. Perhaps most disturbing were the gaps. Hours of Henri Paul's movements went unaccounted for. Crucial CCTV feeds were missing. Parts of the Mercedes disappeared from evidence storage. The AI flagged these not as random oversights but as systematic gaps, the kind of pattern that mirrors operational security rather than sloppy investigation. To human investigators, the inconsistencies of that night were frustrating but inconclusive. To AI, they were patterns. Patterns too neat, too unlikely, and too coordinated to dismiss. The conclusion was unavoidable. Something about the night of August 31st, 1997, didn't align with the randomness of a tragic accident. The data itself was whispering that forces unseen were at play. Red flags in the data. If the convergence anomalies uncovered by AI were startling, what came next was even harder to dismiss. When the system dug deeper into the raw material of Diana's final night, it flagged layer upon layer of irregularities. Red flags that, when viewed together, looked less like tragic oversight and more like systematic control. The first and perhaps most damning finding lay in the testimonies. AI linguistic analysis revealed that 73% of the official statements contained deception markers. These weren't vague gut feelings about dishonesty. They were quantifiable indicators. The algorithms measured sentence structure, word repetition, stress indicators, and subtle inconsistencies across testimonies. What should have been a set of unique personal recollections, instead, showed signs of deliberate coordination, phrases too similar, timings too aligned. The system classified them as controlled narratives, raising the possibility that multiple witnesses had been guided toward the same version of events. Then came the timelines. When the AI cross-referenced police reports, call logs, and witness sightings, it uncovered a 6-hour window on the evening of August 30th that defied explanation. Henri Paul's whereabouts during those missing hours were never fully accounted for, and when his reappearance at the Ritz was plotted against other movements that night, the pattern stood out as an operational anomaly. It wasn't just that he disappeared, it was that the timing of his reemergence aligned with other suspicious movements, too precise to be written off as coincidence. The AI also raised alarms over communication records. Phone calls, radio transmissions, and message logs showed correlation levels 340% higher than random probability would allow. In simple terms, too many people appeared to be operating in quiet synchronization, their actions woven together in a rhythm that looked more like choreography than chance. Emergency response data told its own troubling story. The AI highlighted delays and deviations from standard protocol that were far beyond normal variations. In central Paris, ambulances should have arrived within minutes. Diana remained trapped in the wreckage while flashes from paparazzi cameras continued. When she was finally moved, her ambulance took more than an hour to reach the hospital, despite being less than 4 miles away. The algorithms flagged this not as procedural mishap, but as evidence of response coordination, a statistical fingerprint consistent with premeditated management rather than accident. Even the physical evidence bore irregularities. Parts of the Mercedes vanished from storage. Forensic samples were mishandled or contaminated. CCTV cameras that should have captured critical moments were either turned away, mysteriously inactive, or later reported missing. The AI categorized these not as random oversights, but as a pattern of systematic gaps, hallmarks of deliberate suppression. Individually, these anomalies might still be dismissed as human error, but AI doesn't look at events in isolation. It looks at patterns. And the patterns, when fed through probability models, suggested something chilling. The odds of all these irregularities aligning naturally was less than 1 in 10,000. The data painted a picture human investigators had never been able to see. Diana's death wasn't just surrounded by chaos, it was laced with mathematical fingerprints of control. the ghost in the car. For decades, the crash was explained as a simple collision. A speeding Mercedes, a drunk driver, a chase gone wrong. But the wreckage itself told a different story, one that investigators noted but never fully resolved. It was inside the crumpled Mercedes where some of the most unsettling clues were found, and where AI would later uncover a pattern so disturbing it reshaped the narrative entirely. Among the twisted steel and shattered glass lay fragments that didn't belong. Forensic teams discovered faint streaks of white paint along the right side of the Mercedes, along with shards of a broken red taillight. Laboratory analysis confirmed the fragments matched a Fiat Uno that should have had nothing to do with Diana's final journey. Yet, the physical evidence was undeniable. The Mercedes had made contact with another vehicle moments before it struck the 13th pillar. The problem was that no such Fiat ever officially appeared. There were no license plates recorded, no drivers identified, and no witnesses who could clearly place the vehicle at the scene. French authorities combed through over 4,000 registered Fiat Unos, yet the ghost car slipped away without a trace. It was as if it had vanished into thin air. The mystery deepened when investigators turned their attention to James Anderson, a French paparazzo known for his obsession with Diana. He owned a white Fiat Uno. He had followed Diana and Dodi on previous trips, and, disturbingly, he reportedly boasted of being near the tunnel that very night. The taillight had been replaced. 3 years later, Anderson was found dead in a burned-out car in the French countryside. His death was ruled a suicide, though many questioned how a man could set himself ablaze without leaving behind a lighter or accelerant. For human investigators, the Fiat Uno was always a question mark, a piece of the puzzle that couldn't quite be forced into place. But when AI re-examined the data, it treated the Fiat not as a curiosity, but as a variable in a probability model. The results were chilling. The algorithms flagged the Fiat's unexplained presence. To the machine, the odds of an unconnected Fiat simply colliding with Diana's Mercedes at the exact fatal moment were astronomically low. Far more likely, it concluded, was that the car's appearance was deliberate. AI also noted how the physical evidence surrounding the crash had been mishandled. Critical car parts vanished from storage. Some forensic samples were contaminated beyond use. The tunnel itself was scrubbed and reopened to traffic within hours, long before a full analysis could be completed. When mapped together, these irregularities formed what the AI labeled a systematic gap, a fingerprint of deliberate interference rather than negligence. The wreckage of Diana's car, once thought to hold only tragedy, now appeared to hold secrets. Not just paint streaks and broken glass, but statistical signatures of manipulation. In the cold logic of the machine, the crash scene was no longer random. It was orchestrated. What if the wreckage was speaking a truth only AI could decode? Stay with us as the puzzle unfolds. A future Diana never saw. Artificial intelligence doesn't offer certainty, it offers probability. And when it turned its attention to the night of August 31st, 1997, the probabilities it uncovered were unsettling. The algorithms didn't accuse, they didn't assign blame. What they revealed was a portrait of statistical impossibility, timelines that didn't align, testimonies that read like rehearsed scripts, and physical evidence that slipped through cracks too wide to ignore. People accepted the official story because it was the only one investigators had the tools to tell. But now, machines without emotion or bias suggest that Diana's final hours were not simply a chain of random tragedies. Instead, they resembled a puzzle whose pieces seemed too neatly arranged, too mathematically improbable to be left to chance. And yet, the AI cannot answer the most human of questions. Was it fate, misfortune, or something more complex? Was Diana's final journey into that tunnel the culmination of chaos, or of patterns hidden in plain sight? The machines can show us the anomalies, the missing hours, the unexplained variables, but they cannot tell us why. What lingers is a haunting thought. The truth may have always been there, locked inside the data of that night, waiting for technology advanced enough to reveal its whispers. Perhaps Diana's story will forever straddle the line between tragedy and mystery, her final moments carrying secrets that numbers alone can never fully explain. Artificial intelligence has lifted the veil just enough to remind us that history is never as simple as it seems. And sometimes, even in the cold certainty of math, the shadows only grow deeper. So, what do you think? Was Diana's crash a tragic accident, or a secret the world was never meant to know, uncovered by AI? We'd like to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.